I heard that. Hi, I'm Dave. I'm an alcoholic. I was born on a Sunday, meek and mild, and with a well-developed sense of distrust in nursery rhymes and their ability to foretell human personality. I was the second of four children, older brother, two younger sisters. The family was pretty aggressively middle class, possibly on the lower end. Um, Thinking back, I suspect we were probably a bit poorer than I thought we were when I was a kid. And I'm possibly a little bit confused because there was never a lack. My dad always had a job. We always had a house. We always had food and clothes and love. Didn't always have all the luxury some of my friends may have had, but I had a bicycle, so I thought I was a pretty cool kid. Um, but somehow I never quite felt like I fit in. And it was only when I came through the doors of AA that I started realizing how much of a refrain that is and how many people actually had the same experience. There were two strange little quirks of nature that fed into that feeling of mine. One was the fact that I was born in South Africa, in a city called Durban, in the province of Natal. Now, yeah, area in Durban called the Bluff. So the saying is always rough and tough, born on the bluff, but not really. In South Africa, we have provinces, comparable to your states, but not as independent. Okay. So we have a national government, a strong national government, and then mostly for admin purposes, kind of we have provincial governments. But one example, you would never get one province still having the death penalty and other provinces not. We're not that, our provinces are just not that independent. But since there are people involved, there are misunderstandings going on. So I was victim of one of those. I went to school in KZN because I was born in the Bluff in Durban, and then 18 months later, I moved to that picturesque industrial slum at the foot of Fields Hill, a city known as Pinetown, where I then went to school. Now in South Africa, we have a 12-year schooling program. The first 2 years are considered like preparatory levels, and then you get 5 years of primary school and 5 years of secondary school. And then in the final year of that, which is called matric, you kind of finish the school and then you go to tertiary. Um, and the practice in South Africa was that you go to school when you are 6. But that memo got confused. So in Natal, the province where I was born and went to school, the practice was that you go to school when you are 5, turning 6. And then within 2 years of me going to school, we moved to Stellenbosch, the town just outside of Cape Town in the province, in the Cape province. And there the practice was that you go to school when you are 6, turning 7. So as a result of that little geographical quirk, I ended up being a year younger than my classmates for the rest of my schooling career. And there's a whole pile of educational psychologists lining up to tell you that that's a very bad idea and that it shows. And I remember my mom towards the end of my secondary schooling career saying that at one point she did think about holding me back a year so that I could kind of catch up with my peers. And even then I knew that I would have been vehemently opposed to it. Now I look at it and I go, oh, that would have been a brilliant idea. But once again, hindsight is 2020 vision. So at the time, I was that opposed to it simply because of the fact that there's always been this bit of a stigma about kids that get held back, right? They're the slow kids. Now, I'm not blowing my own horn here because if I could, I'd never leave the house. But the reason for my lack of a stellar academic career has got nothing to do with the fact that I'm slow. It's because I'm a lazy bastard. Um, at least not intellectually slow. Emotionally, however, different story. The EQ possibly not being quite as high as I may have or would have liked it to be. So that's why it's quite interesting that I've now ended up in another industry where EQ is still uh, pretty important, even if it is a lot easier to adjust because we got a knob for that now. And yes, it does go to 11. Bonus points if you get the movie reference. Um, so grew up not quite fitting in. And then there was another little thing that played into the whole problem as well, which is the fact that I was born with very bad eyesight, minus 7.5, minus 8, if you're keeping score, which is not so bad as to immediately rush you into a lens replacement operation. But I could obviously have one if I could afford it. And that's why recently, when I was in an eye examination by my favorite all-time optometrist, 40 odd years of wearing glasses. This guy is just the best optometrist I ever met. Guy by the name of Keith Curtin, Kirton. And in this eye examination, he looks at me and he goes, Dave, good news, you're getting cataracts. And I'm going, Keith, I know you're a bit quirky, dude. That's the reason I like you. But really, good news, cataract? And he was like, yeah. So I was about to punch him. And then he explained to say that if they have to go in and do an operation to clean out the cataract, right, and replace your lenses, right, you can replace it with anything. Day-old hamburgers. And I said, well, ideally not. And he said, no, but what he means is that they can replace the lenses with lenses that have been prepared to your specifications. So you then have normal eyesight. But if they do that in order to treat your cataracts, it's considered a medical procedure and your medical aid will pay for it. Whereas if you do it simply to get better eyesight, they consider that a cosmetic procedure, and then they won't pay for that. So good news, you're getting cataracts. And I was like, yes, he would have been one of those grateful alcoholics, wouldn't he? So this was only figured out when I was about 10, 11. And then the optometrist explained to my mom, to my parents, that the little muscles in your eye, that the ones that contract the lens to make you focus, help you focus, are tiny little things. So when they have to work too hard, they take strain really easily or really quickly. And when they get really tired, they want to do one of two things. They want to look really far, because then the muscles can just relax and you can just see. And they want to look at something green, because there's something in the wavelength of green light that helps relax the eyes. That's why there exists a color called cockpit green that they used to paint the inside of our fighter pilot cockpits. They also use it for operating theaters. And as he was explaining this, my mom suddenly went, oh, because in every teacher-parent conference she's ever been to, the teachers always said, oh, Dave is this and Dave is that, but he's such a dreamer. When he should be paying attention on the board, he's staring out of the window. And then my mom realized that I wasn't dreaming and staring out the window. I was trying to relax my eyes. I was getting a workout. So got glasses, and obviously getting glasses at school is also not the greatest way of really fitting in. So all of that kind of added to the fact that I just never quite felt like I fit in. Spent my schooling career pretty much in the middle of the pack. I didn't bother the awards ceremony at the end of the year ever. Refer back to the previous lazy bastard comment. And went through school. I have to point out that alcohol was never a thing in our house. And it was so not a thing that it was just never a thing. I didn't drink, my parents didn't drink, their parents didn't drink. And that always reminds me, I love it when I hear somebody share in AA and they go, oh, I've got a sponsor and my sponsor's got a sponsor and his sponsor's got a sponsor. And I always think to myself, AA may not be a sect, but it's surely shaping up to be one hell of a Ponzi scheme. But the whole non-drinking thing in the family, there were only really two pieces that we knew about, or that I remember thinking or knowing about alcohol. One was an uncle on my mom's side of the family, the Afrikaans side, who would on a Sunday afternoon, well, not quite an uncle, it was a bit further up than that. But on a Sunday afternoon, he would lie on the couch drinking big quarts of beer, and he would cry and he would listen to the music of Die Briels. Now, to put that into context for you, this is a family group, father, mom, and a daughter. And they sang Appalachian hillbilly kind of stuff, a lot of yodeling in there. And this is in the 30s and 40s. And their records, in terms of selling records, were only broken in South Africa in 1992. And their biggest hit was a song written about the worst disaster, coal mining disaster in South African history, and the sixth worst such disaster in the world. So that's the kind of music we're talking about. And you would lie there on a Sunday afternoon, sucking down beer and crying. And the other one was, at some point, when we were still living in Pinetown, a can of beer had ended up in our fridge. And I got no idea how. Nobody seemed to quite know. But there it was. And my dad was playing squash at the time. I don't know if squash is a game that you guys know. I think it might be close to racquetball, played inside of a building, so you hit against the walls. Quite a fast-paced game. Anyway, and the guy was playing with him that night. They drove together, came back, and my dad offered him this beer. And if you ever played squash and or drank beer, you would know that having a beer after a game of squash is a pretty damn fun idea. So this guy went, yeah, sure thing. So he had the beer, and I just have this really bizarre little memory of thinking, watching this guy drink the beer and wondering, when is he going to start hitting my mom? Why exactly I had that little narrative in my head, I have no idea. But apart from that, really, it wasn't a thing when we had celebrations and whatever. As a family, we were grape juice people. Monis, not grape tizer, in case you're counting. When we moved down to Stellenbosch, it was a bit different. My parents were church-going people, and in the Western Cape, in and around Stellenbosch, there are so many wine farmers. It's winelands. That whenever the church had a function or anything, the wine farmers would be there with barrels of wine, and everybody stands around sipping a glass of wine. The preacher, everybody. It's a very normalized use of alcohol. So slowly but surely, my parents kind of got into that, and then eventually my dad developed quite a bit of a taste for a product called Hunters in this country. It's a cider, and also a thing called Cape Velvet Cream Liqueur. It's a bit like Bailey's. So with my dad into those things, obviously my chances of getting any form of street cred whatsoever disappeared finally. Going through school, mates with a couple of friends, and occasionally we would get together and have a braai at somebody's house, which is a bit like a barbecue, but I think it's closer to what you guys would call a cookout kind of thing. Everybody hangs around the fire and cook meat and eat and stuff. And, one guy would swipe a couple of beers from his dad's cabinet or get a bottle of something or steal a couple of cigarettes or whatever. And no Jackie Baba. And it was never hectic or harsh. It wasn't some light altering moment that all of a sudden I had alcohol and my life was better. The only thing I really remember about this, and this I only really pinpointed once again after coming to AA, was the fact that I would always be the one to say, can we get some more? It wasn't a train smash if we didn't, but it was just interesting when I noticed that was where I was. Went out of school because my dad worked at university. I could study without paying class fees, which was a hell of a saving. So went straight to university, partly also because in this country we had conscription because of our war. It's called the border war up in Southwest, what is now Namibia. And I wasn't really that keen on it. It was a 2-year conscription. I didn't particularly buy into the whole idea. But if you didn't go to the army, you had to go to prison for 6 years. And I wasn't too keen on that idea either. And I wasn't quite morally mature enough to take a stand. So I didn't, but I thought I'd try and get out of it by studying for a long time. Now, the longest course you could study would be that for becoming a preacher in this country, but that was never going to fly with me. So I went for the other option, which is to become a clinical psychologist. Unfortunately, refer back to the lazy bastard comment from earlier. That didn't fly so well either. So after about a year and a bit, they came to me and they said, listen, they're now revoking my privilege of studying without paying class fees. But if after the absence of 1 year, I would like to reapply. So I took the hint and I thought, okay, I'll go to the army. And this was around about June. They had 2 intakes, one in January, one in June. And I know one thing that we do very differently from the States is that our year runs from January to December. Then the world shuts down and we start again in January, right? But I thought, okay, with the June intake coming up, let me go to the army in June. Let's get it over with. And then my mom came to me and said, no, don't go in June. Just stick around because else you would have lost the first 6 months. And then when you come out in June, you've got another 6 months where you're at a loose end. So rather go back to varsity. Don't take it seriously. Study a bit. If you pass anything, you can always use the credit later. But just have a party. So I thought, okay, Mom, you're off the hook for that holding me back bullshit now. So I did. Didn't get hectic, just arbed around, did pass a couple of courses, drank some, nothing serious. Went to the army. Army's got a weird relationship with alcohol at the best of times. Came out of that and ended up working in hotels because I was still at a bit of a loose end, fancy that. In hotels also, you get very good at playing with yourself because when other people are out playing, you working, and when you want to go play, everybody else is working. So it's once again another little nice insular industry for me to be in. Eventually ended up buying an old 67 VW bus, drove around the country working as a waiter when I needed money. And then eventually slowly you kind of, you meet a young lady and you kind of want to settle down and rent a house and you have to mow the lawn. So one day I phoned my dad and I said, Dad, I sold my soul today. And he said, what have you done now, Dave? So I was like, well, I bought a lawnmower. And he was, you fucked now, lad. I was like, well, thanks, Dad. So yeah, the lawnmower eventually got sold. So don't worry about it. It's not around anymore. I've now got a different one. Lived life and all the way through used alcohol. Drank thing called Hansa Pilsner. Eventually went on to the well-known South African beer known as Black Label, or Zamalek, or Soweto Pepsi, it's also referred to. Because I was born on the 17th of March, developed quite a taste for Guinness and tequila. One of the people who actually enjoyed the taste of tequila. It was, yeah, my joy, but never a problem. Life carried on. Ended up getting married quite by accident. Well, I ended up being in radio quite by accident, and then got married quite by accident. I half jokingly point out that I got married for a British passport and bad sex, and I never got the British passport. But we were going to go over and work in the UK during winter, and then use the money to travel into Europe during the summer, because we both fancied the idea of traveling and just seeing interesting places and what. But yeah, that turned out to be a marriage that should have been a shag, and not even. And during that period of time, she was very prim and proper, and always had, like, a little on the display cabinet in the lounge. There would be like a tray with a couple of glasses and a bottle of whiskey and whatnot. And partially because I'm a fuckwit, when she pissed me off, which was only when she was awake, I would just walk up and take the bottle of whiskey and have a swig, and I started developing an enjoyment of drinking straight out of a bottle like that. And I think that kind of set the tone of the medicinal style of drinking that I ended up doing. And then obviously I just got really good at finding new reasons to drink. And so drinking straight out of a bottle became a thing. And eventually I matured a bit and I ended up drinking out of shot glasses. Along the way, also met up with Vicky. We have now been together for about, I worked it out the other day, it's about 17 years. And yes, it does feel like about 10 minutes underwater. And we started drinking together. I do carry some guilt for that. No, Jackie. Baba. I do feel some guilt in that, because it became a habitual thing, and we ended up drinking in the way that I'd always drunk. And she's a bit smaller than me, so she always argues with me when I say that I carry some guilt for it, which is fine. So yeah, we started drinking, and from then, once again, looking back, we can now see the progression and how quickly it went, how soon we realized we were in trouble, how soon we started doing stupid shit like, okay, let's wait, only one drink only every 20 minutes or whatever. I actually had a timer on my phone. But it got to a stage where getting home from the office, we would need to have so many so quickly just to kind of feel normal again, that hour-long thing didn't work. So we tried just having tequila instead, because I was working at a big, similar to a Walmart place called Macro around here. And I was working there doing announcements on Saturdays and Sundays. And they had a special where you can buy a bottle of tequila with 2 glasses for less than you would pay for the bottle of tequila. So we had a lot of those shot glasses, branded shot glasses, for a while. Don't be loud. We tried that. So the typical things of spacing it. Eventually, we did drink a lot of water, which is one only good thing we did. At one point, I did pick up a medical problem, and I ended up in hospital for a couple of weeks with the drinking. My liver count went out of control. Vicky ended up in hospital for a while shortly after the original lockdown, because I still had to go to the office, but she stayed, and she ended up drinking herself into what they called liver psychosis. I never knew that was a thing. I thought they spelt it wrong on the form. And then what eventually happened was, one morning my boss passed me drunk at work, and I would normally go to the office about 10 whiskeys in, because we'd have a couple just to feel normal in the morning. I would take her one in the shower, she would bring me one in the shower, and then we would have 1 or 2 more just to get on the road. And he passed me drunk at the office. He said to me, "I don't want to fire you." It was the first thing he said to me. I thought, okay, that's pretty bloody decent of him. But he said, "You need to get help." So I was on suspension for a while, then went back to the office, had a chat to the HR person from head office. And yeah, they got this employee wellness program and whatnot, and they did nothing. And one day myself and Vicky went to go see our GP for a completely unrelated issue. And he just looked at us and said he didn't want to let us leave his offices until we were booked into a rehab to start the next morning. And we did explain to him that that's just not doable, because we've got a house and whatnot. But ended up we went into rehab on the 8th of May. Our sobriety date is the 9th of May, because there's no version of reality in which I will go into an alcohol rehab sober. did the rehab 21 days, came out, and yeah, 436 days later, here we are. We're still not entirely sure how it happened, but we started in traditional AA, had a couple of nasty experiences with really shitty groups where service was all but weaponized. Tradition 2 and 7 are pretty much not even known of or adhered to at all. So moved out of that, but along the way, picked up the good people. Somebody wrote that whole piece about find the others, and I've been very, very privileged in doing so. And that eventually found Sonia Key from also from South Africa, and together we kind of started finding our way in secular AA, and eventually we ended up here. I'm so sorry about that, and I'm really, really seeing an immense amount of benefit from the secular AA approach. I cannot believe how much of a relief it is to not have to ignore half the meeting. I know it sounds like a silly little thing, but it makes such a difference. I'm still in traditional AA. There are still cool people I know there. I do service at a traditional AA group. This is one thing I did get stuck in quite badly is service. But yeah, I am such a fan of secular AA. And I just thank you all very, very much for keeping this meeting alive. I love it for the innovative ways in which you bring up the major issues. I believe that through all of that, you've trained and you've grown a group of really, really spark-minded individuals, and I love being around it. I did explain this meeting to somebody else the other day by saying it's an entire meeting of people who are as full of shit as I am. It's fucking heaven. And that's about the highest compliment I can pay you guys. That, and Mary, thank you ever so much for this opportunity. I thank you for allowing me to be of service.